This is the screencast for Factor Quadratics by Grouping. In this screencast, you're going to learn how to factor a quadratic expression using grouping. The reason that we learn to factor quadratics, especially by grouping, is so that we can find zeros and graph polynomials. Prior to this lesson, or to have a good understanding of this lesson, you should know how to factor trinomials. There's also our earlier lesson of factor polynomials by grouping. They all share a lot of the same traits. So, okay, so we're going to do two examples. Here's our first example. We need to factor 6x squared minus 29x plus 9. As I'm saying that out loud, even though 6 and 9 share common factors, I do not see that 29 shares a common factor with those. So I'm just going to go ahead and start to factor. And as we learned in earlier math classes and earlier lessons, it's in standard form. I'm going to identify my A, my B, and my C. And when factoring, we also know that our product sum table or product sum box is helpful. And what goes in the top triangle is our product, which is 6 times 9. What goes in our bottom triangle is the sum, which is negative 29. That's our B term. And what we are going to do is try to figure out what are two factors of 54. Then when you add them together, give you a sum of negative 29. As I'm thinking about this, I see that I have a positive product with a negative sum. That means I'm looking for two factors that are both negative. So here you could list the factors of 54. There is also another screencast talking about how to find factor pairs with your calculator. So however it is that you figure this out, we know that our two factors that we're looking for are negative 2 and negative 27. So negative 2 times negative 27 is 54. Negative 2 plus negative 27 is 29. Now, earlier, in a lot of our earlier factoring, we would pretty much be done with the problem. But because our leading coefficient is not 1, we need a different strategy. And the strategy is going to be grouping. And as we learned in our factor polynomials, really what is the most helpful is if there are 4 terms, not 3. So what I need to do is rewrite or unsimplify these 3 terms so that I have 4 terms. And I do that by using the negative 2 and the negative 27. So instead of writing negative 29x, I'm going to rewrite it as negative 2x minus 27x. And again, if you were to simplify this, you get back to where we started. But our purpose is to factors to show two things being multiplied together. So as we've done in earlier lessons, I am just going to focus on 2 terms at a time. I want to take a look at what is the greatest common factor of 6x squared and negative 2x, and that would be 2x. And when you factor out the 2x, you get 3x minus 1. 2x times 3x is 6x squared. 2x times negative 1 is negative 2x. Okay, now as we look at the second 2 terms, I do notice that this third term is negative, so I do want to factor out a negative. And I'm going to factor out the greatest common factor, which would be negative 9. And then what happens when we factor out the negative 9, we get 3x minus 1. As discussed in earlier lessons, this is a great double check point because you should have 2 identical binomials as a factor. When you do that, you will factor out the 3x minus 1, and you will write the remaining 2 factors, the 2x minus 9. Like you could write plus negative 9, but 2x minus 9 is fine. And that's your answer. So that is how you factor by grouping. So you're going to go from 3 terms to 4 terms to a product. Let's take a look at one more problem. We are going to factor 4x squared plus 2x minus 6. And I do notice that these terms are all even, so I could factor out a 2, and I think, yes, the 2 is the greatest common factor. And what happens to the 2 is it's important, but I can ignore it for a little while. So that 2 is just going to stay in the background, and it is going to kind of stay along for the ride, but it's not going to be in the forefront of how I solve a problem. I am just going to focus on this 2x squared plus x minus 3. And when I'm looking at how to create my product sum box, I'm going to use a equals 2, b equals 1, and c equals negative 3 from here. So there's my product sum box. I'm looking for a product of negative 6 and a sum of 1. And I believe that those two factors would be 3 and negative 2. Again, my product is negative, so that means that one factor is going to be positive, one factor is going to be negative. Now, my goal is to go from 3 terms to 4, so I'm going to rewrite x as 3x minus 2x, because 3x minus 2x is x, but I want 4 terms. So I take a look at what do these first 2 terms have in common, and they only have an x. What do these 2 terms have in common? Well, I definitely have to factor out a negative, but they don't really have anything else in common. So when they don't have anything in common, you say 1. So actually, we're going to factor out the negative 1, and we have 2x plus 3 as our factor. So I double check. I have identical factors, which is what I needed. So I, again, keep bringing the 2 down. I'm going to factor out that 2x plus 3. And then I write my remaining factors, x minus 1. Now, as you write your final answer, you don't need those outer parentheses. So the way that you would see your answer would be 2 times 2x plus 3 times x minus 1. So those were 2 examples that can help you figure out how to factor an equation, a quadratic equation, using grouping.